Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Hobbies, and in today's video, I'm going to be painting up some Death Guard, and that's because Games Workshop recently put out some new material, and it got me thinking, I've had this box for quite a while, and while I assembled and I primed a bunch of these guys, I never got around to painting them. Now, no eyes of judgment, because I know none of you have done the exact same thing. So with this video, number one, I'm already painting them, so I might as well film it, and that goes right into number two. I like seeing how other artists work, so if you can take any of my tips and tricks and utilize them in a future build, that's fantastic. And number three, and the most important one, if and when I ever add to this army, I don't have to go find a piece of paper that has all my colors and the steps. I can reference my video and paint each one in the future exactly like the ones I've done now. Now, most of the squad is painted to tabletop standards, and that's because I actually want to use them for gaming. A lot of my Trench Crusade friends are also 40K players and have tried to convince me to jump into that. And while I've painted a bunch of 40K, I've never actually played the game, so I figured this would be a good opportunity to get a chunk of the army done. Now, with this particular model, I wanted to take one a little bit further, so I did volumetric highlighting and shadows. I gave him an extensive base of mud textures and earth powders and UV resins, and so if I ever want to take my tabletop standard miniatures and bump them up, I definitely can, and I have a reference for that. So I want to show you how I painted up my Death Guard. Let's go ahead and get started. Like I had mentioned before, I assembled these guys quite a while ago, and I primed them using some Acrylics transparent, leaf green, and crimson. Now in this video, I was sent a review copy of Gilded Goblin's new brush set, and so I used these exclusively throughout the video to paint my Death Guard miniatures, and overall, I was really happy with how they held up. In fact, if you would like to check them out, I'll put a link down in the description. I'm going to start by highlighting my primer layer using Vallejo brand's Olive Drab. Here I'm picking out light sources while keeping my primer undertones in place. To the Olive Drab, I'm going to add a 1-to-1 mix of Vallejo brand's Lime Green. This is going to be applied in smaller areas, being more mindful of overhead light sources. In fact, it's not going to be applied to all of the armor, only going on certain sections, such as the upper chest, the helmet, the back of the heels, and the elbows. For my metallic trims, I'm going to be using a gilded paint brass that I found at Michael's. You could also use any of your favorite brass acrylics. Now, a gilding paint like this covers extremely well, so you want to be very mindful and not get it onto any of the green sections. But the positive is that it has a really good reflective quality that some standard acrylics just don't have. Vallejo Purple will now be applied to all of the cloth sections as the main army color. Of course, you could change this if you wanted your army to have a unique look. Vallejo brand's Green Ochre works as a fantastic base for the teeth, the skulls, and the horns. Because of the slight greenish tint that it already has, it works really well complementing the armor. Now this paint is a little thin, so I do recommend it in 2 coats. You could utilize your first coat as the base layer and your second coat as the highlight. For all of the grotesque fleshy bits and tentacles, I'm going to be using Vallejo brand's Brown Rose. Unlike the Green Ochre, this has a great contrast to the armor and really helps these sections stand out. Pro Acryl's Dark Silver was applied to all of the chainmail as well as some of the exposed metal bits. It's best applied as a dry brush more so than a complete coverage. I don't have a lot of wood or leather sections on these models, but those that are on there received a base coating of Vallejo brand's Chocolate Brown. To separate some of the brass sections, some pro-acryl copper was used. This allowed another warm metallic to still be put onto the model, but it still visually separated itself slightly from the brass. For lighter cloth sections and the maggots, I used Vallejo brand's green gray. Now I know this looks really bright, but it's going to be knocked down with the wash. With all my minis base coated, it's now time to add a wash mixture of Pro Acryl Strong Tint and Citadel's Lamy Medium. This is going to be applied to the entire model using a brush. The wash is moved around, making sure it gets down into all the recesses, but also to prevent it from pooling. After this has been applied, the wash will need to dry for about 20 minutes. And here you can see what a big difference that wash makes. In fact, at this point, after this wash is applied, I would consider these models tabletop ready. But I'm going to take one model a bit further just to show the steps. So when it comes to volumetric highlighting, I'm really trying to pick out light sources and shadows, and you're trying to make them even more vibrant than you would normally see with your naked eye. And that's because having a miniature this small, the more vibrant it is, the more that contrast is going to kick up, and especially if it's on a table or if it is within a couple feet away, it makes it pop that much more. The first step in our volumetric shading is going to be applying some Army Painter's Familiar Pink to all of the fleshy pits and tentacles. Being a speed paint, this will flow down into the recesses, giving us more natural highlights. After the speed paint is dried, some Vallejo brand Brown Rose is going to be used as our first highlight. Now if you notice, I am only painting this in the uppermost light source, so I'm still leaving it somewhat dark in the recesses under his arms and at the bottom of the tentacles. Because this was the initial color before the wash and the speed paint, slightly watered down, it works as a fantastic highlight. Just like the fleshy bits, olive drab and lime green are going to be used as the first highlight layer on the armor. Now the wash did a great job highlighting recesses and breaking up shapes, so this paint is only going to be applied to larger areas or to accent edges. To further refine the edges and details, pure lime green is now going to be used. This is going to be more watered down and actually glazed onto these highlighted sections. And as a glaze, it does highlight, but it still allows the previous layers to also show through. To tint the details on the horns and the brass, I'm going to be using Army Painter's Warrior Skin. This is slightly watered down just so it flows a little bit better into the recesses. But when this paint dries, it's going to be matte, so it's going to look great around the metallic rivets in the darker corners of the armor. Green ochre is once again going to be used. This time it's going to be thinned down to help pick out the striations in the horns. Using less water and keeping it more of an opaque paint, it works great at highlighting the skulls and the teeth. Vallejo brand's Bone White is going to be used as the final highlight layer on these sections. Now the game paints can be a little bit thicker, so I would recommend to water them down a little bit more than the model version. Worst case scenario, you just build this color up in a couple of different layers. The bone white also works great as a shiny highlight on all the fleshy bits. For his sword, I'd like to go with a patina, so I'm going to start with some Pro Acryl copper. From there, I'm going to apply some Dirty Down verdigris, and I apply this kind of thick so it has a good chemical reaction. From there, I can go back and edge highlight with the copper around the outside of the blade, as well as add some striations along the cutting edge. The verdigris is also going to be used around some of the rivets and darker areas of the armor. This is definitely a technique you could overdo, so I use it a little more sparingly. After the verdigris had the opportunity to dry, I then switched over to the Dirty Down rust. This will be applied to the chainmail and his gun. And I know, guns should be clean, but that's not how these guys roll. Pro Acryl's dark silver is going to be dry brushed on as a highlight. Now the big thing here is to make sure that I'm not covering up all of the rust that I've already added. I still want bits of that reddish matte color to show through. Vallejo brand's gunmetal gray is going to be used to edge highlight his gun, as well as some very small sections of his chainmail. Now at this point, seeing all of the colors together, I decided to punch the armor just a little bit more. So I thinned down some Vallejo brand's green-gray and applied this in the smallest detailed areas. But having a heavy contrast light color like this next to some of these darker outlines, it definitely makes certain sections of this model pop. I'm trying to draw the eyes to the most important parts of this model, being the face and his belly. The gray-green also acts as a decent highlight onto some of the skulls. I had already added cork to my base, but to texture it up, I'm going to be using some mud from my friends over at Bear Cavalry. This is a textured-based paint made from sustainable elements like coffee grounds, and it does a good job breaking up the monotony of the cork and just giving it a little something extra. To keep my color values consistent, more of the green-gray is going to be used as a highlight and dry brushed onto the mud after it's cured. To colorize the textures on my base, I'm going to start by using Army Painter's Pallid Bone. This will tint the paint that's already down, but it'll also help by flowing into the recesses. Speed Paint Dark Wood is also applied in the same way, but more so in the shadowed areas. I would like to have some texture values as a contrast on the base, so I'm going to be using some UV resin and Liquitex acrylic ink. A couple drops of the muted green and the transparent raw sienna is all it takes to tint the resin. From there I can take a coffee stir stick and just deposit it onto the base. And before it has an opportunity to flow too much, I hit it with a UV light to cure it. This process can then be repeated around the base of the model until I'm satisfied with the overall look. Now normally I like to tape my bases off, but I did these a long time ago, so I need to clean it up using some coal black. For the areas that don't have the liquid resin, I would like it to look a little more dry, so I'm going to be using some Special Effects makeup powder. This is basically the equivalent to using earth pigments, but find out which one is cheaper for you and what color you'd like. To highlight the stones, I'm going to water down some green ochre. Again, even though this is on the base, this is still pulling those same colors that are on the top portion of the model. That way there's a color harmony throughout the entire piece. Now at this point, notice that I'm not dry brushing. I'm picking out individual stones with a very small brush. Visually, this is going to be a lot more detailed in the end, because pretty much that's what nature does. And that is my completed Plague Marine. Now of course there are always things that I could do better and improve on. It just depends on how much time you want to put into a single model. And does he look better than the rest of them? Of course. But it just depends on what your goals are and if it's worth it for your time in the end. So this was a fun little project that I was able to work on over the course of a weekend, and I got quite a bit painted. Now, are they done? No, they're never done. You can always add more to your minis. But I think this was a good jumping off point, and I think it was a good start to an army if this is a direction I want to go. And if nothing else, if you learned a tip or trick from the video, then it's definitely worth it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.